Hi, friends. Logan Clements here, one of your co hosts with the Better Events podcast. And this week's episode, you're going to be hearing from Mary. This is her solo episode. You heard mine 2 weeks ago, all about if Zoom was dead and some virtual tips for your next event. Well, Mary is diving into all things nonprofit programming and scripting. This one is so crucial. It's filled with so many good nuggets. I can't wait for you to hear it. If you are someone who works in the nonprofit sector or has nonprofit clients, there are so many tips and tricks in here for how to have a more impactful programming, which we all know is what leads to the actual fundraising efforts behind some of these fundraising events. So, hope you enjoy Mary's episode.
Welcome to the Better Events Podcast. Join two event strategists, Logan Clements and Mary Davidson, who believe we can all create, host, and attend better events. In this podcast, you will learn about event strategy and actions that you can use today as an event host, planner, or manager. Hear directly from the people who are creating innovative and inspiring events today and tomorrow, and grow your business along the way. Now, let's get started, and thanks for listening to the Better Events Podcast.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another week at the Better Events Podcast. We are thrilled to be with you. And by we, I mean me. Today, you're hearing just from me. This is Mary Davidson, one of your co-hosts. And when I have solo episodes, which Logan and I will sometimes do, Logan did hers a couple weeks ago. Now it's my solo episode. I always go back and forth trying to figure out what I want to take this time to share with you all. So thank you so much for taking the time. Today, we are talking about fundraising. Last time I did a solo episode, believe it or not, I did not talk about fundraising. I think it was the venue checklist episode, if I am correct. And so I thought it would be a good time to bring it back to something that I love to talk about, which is fundraising events. So if you are involved in a fundraising event, either as a planner, a board member, a community member, or someone else, this is for you. We are talking all about fundraising program and scripting tips and tricks. So we are really going to get into the nitty-gritty of one piece of a fundraising event, which is the program. Now, many events obviously have programs. So there is some rollover here with whatever kind of event that you do, but we are going to get pretty specific into elements that you see in fundraising events. And so I'll share a lot of examples and things like that. But this is super important. It's a very important part of your fundraising event. These, you could argue, are is the most important thing that you spend your time on, besides sponsorship and some other things like that we've already talked about. But your program makes a huge impact. And these nonprofit events are heavily programmatic events. They just are many times. So we're talking mostly about like the sit down luncheons, breakfasts, dinners, nonprofit events with heavy programs like this. So if you're thinking of like a 5K or a fun run or something like that, maybe it's not as applicable. However, I would say that the words that you say, even in a 5K, because there is sometimes like a little bit of a program hello type of thing, what you say is still important, obviously. And here's why. Well, many reasons, but there is a quote that comes to my mind from Maya Angelou. You may have heard it. It says, "I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." This is the epitome of a program for a nonprofit event. So in fundraising events, programs, and scripting, you are basically evoking feelings in those that are partaking in your program, that are listening to it, that are attending your event, because it connects them to your mission during the program and influences them to donate or volunteer or support the organization in some other way. But your programs can really evoke this and convince people of this or remind them of why they're there and why they're involved. And so when programs are done right, they create feelings that lead to action from the attendee. And that is why they're, once again, so important. So hopefully I'm convincing you, if you had to be convinced about the importance of this. We're kind of setting the stage here, as we like to do. So to further dig into this point just a little bit more, you might have like a really cool photo booth or something like that. You might have like the best short rib dinner in your city at your event. And yes, some people might remember that. I specifically remember that event I was at. But the program is what's going to influence action. And so programs can also be used to educate. And I think this is important because when we talk about if you're doing a friendraiser or a fundraiser, which I've talked about before in other episodes, this is where you can really, really use education. So if it's a fundraiser, more of a community event, a lot of times these are used to educate the community, to have people come and learn more about your cause. And so this is a perfect example of using a program to educate. Now, another example of this is this year did an event. It was a luncheon, and this was your typical luncheon in the sense that it's like an hour-long program. People from the business community came to this nonprofit event. They sat down during lunch, they had a meal, and they listened to a program. But the program was probably the most educational luncheon program that I had ever heard or been a part of. I learned a ton just being the event planner and listening to it through. And so they were really aiming to educate the community in a way that influenced them to give during the luncheon. And so once again, programs can also be used to educate, and they did a great job of giving stats, metrics, specific numbers that worked for their organization and what they did, which was really, really convincing people kind of to support those metrics and things that they were learning specifically. So, okay, let's dive into it a little bit more. What are some of the key components to a fundraising program? I'm going to split it into two parts. One is like bite-sized standards or ideas, and the other one are like big ideas for your program. So let's start small. These are things that like kind of have to do with like how to start off, how to end, or like what to splatter in between. And this is not a one size fits all. There is not well, there isn't a strong industry standard. I would say there is some standard that's there. But depending on where you live, this might be different. So I'm just going to share some ideas with you that might be true for you. They may not, but these are based on the experience that I have mostly here in the Seattle, Washington area. So some key program components that are more bite-sized. So one thing that is really important to a lot of organizations is to start off the program with, believe it or not, a welcome. Yes, of course. You welcome people when they come in. You say hello, you set the stage, you thank them for being there. And then right after that, a lot of times they will do a land acknowledgement. So a land acknowledgement is something that thanks the land that the event is on. So in our area, we have a lot of tribal communities that are around us and have been for a long, long time. And so folks will do a land acknowledgement during this time. And so that's something that happens near the beginning of the program. That's an example of one of these pieces that you can start off with around the time of the welcome. And there are some other things as well, which I'm sure you've seen. Board members can be acknowledged, staff can be acknowledged, event committees can be acknowledged, and how you acknowledge these looks different for everybody. One of the ways that I've seen either staff or board members or committee members be acknowledged is through a PowerPoint slide deck. And so their names are on the screen, and either they are verbally, well, not often actually, they verbally acknowledge the group, but not the individuals by name. That would take a really long time. There's like a whole pronunciation thing with that. And so they'll just kind of show their names and acknowledge them verbally. Or they may ask them to stand up, to raise their hand, and folks will kind of clap and things like that. Now, if it's a sponsor, they might get, more individual acknowledgement. And I have to say, with this, as you're thinking through your program, think about the values that are important to your organization. There are a lot of organizations we work with here in the area that are really, really into community-centric fundraising and what it looks like to represent community in their programs and their events. So how they acknowledge people might be different than the traditional way that folks are acknowledged in a program. So do keep that in mind as you're listening to this. If you're involved in a nonprofit event program, how do you want to acknowledge people and what aligns with your values in that sense? These are some of the, once again, the bite-sized things that we're scattering in. So then you kind of get up and running. You're going to start introducing your speakers. You get some housekeeping notes out of the way. But we want to grab people's attention fairly quickly. And so one thing that I really love to encourage, because once again, this is a nonprofit event, is getting people to connect about the mission pretty immediately so that you are grabbing them from the start. So a great way to do this is to have like a table topic. You can put a question on the screen. You could do a Mentimeter where people are all participating, or like a Slido type of thing. Or you could just verbally pose a question and have them talk with their table mates about it for 5 minutes or something. You could kind of have this conversation take place during the first 10 minutes of the meal. So we've seen lately that a lot of programs are having like a 10-minute meal break sort of near the beginning, so folks can start eating in a way where they're a little bit more comfortable, and then they can actually talk and meet their table mates, which is important because a lot of times you'll just sit down and get right into it and they never have the opportunity to meet those around them. But these events are networking for a lot of people who are attending as well. And so to give them a moment just to talk is really, I think, something they appreciate. But we do that at the beginning after the welcome, before we get into the meat of the event, because we don't want to interrupt that process once we're going. Let's say you have a 10-minute break where folks are talking at their table. Maybe they've been given a topic and they're eating and blah, 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 blah. And you bring them back and you're going to jump into the program. Before we talk more about that, we're talking about bite-sized elements right now. At the end, we're going to jump all the way to the end of your program, some things that you could kind of throw in there. So, of course, we have thank yous. We can do acknowledgments even again. But there are some things that you can do in regards to sharing how much money you've raised. Now, this is a pretty controversial thing, actually. So you might be an organization who shares at the end of the night that we met our goal. We raised $250,000 tonight. Thank you so much, everybody. And everybody's excited that they contributed to that. I have seen this where they have not met their goal. They maybe were at like $235,000. And so they take that as an opportunity to say, our goal is 250. We're at 235. Is there anyone that's willing to make up the difference? Like, how many people can we get to raise their paddle again at $500 just to get us closer? And someone will always donate again to kind of get them closer to that goal. I'm not saying that's an ideal way to do it. I'm just saying that's a way that I've seen it done. For this reason, I personally am not a huge fan of announcing totals at the end of an event. I think that's something that you can email out later. But even then, like, why are you emailing out the total? Because when folks are sharing how much money they've raised at an event, that's not ever a net number. That's your gross revenue from the event. That's from sponsorship, ticket sales, everything. But how much have you actually spent? How much of the money is actually going to the cause that you raised funds for that night? Those are cooler stats to say, like, 100% of the funds that we raised in the room that night went to the cause because of our generous sponsors or something like that. Or we had 100% participation. Everybody in the room that night gave. So those are, like, in my opinion, cooler stats that aren't tying you to a number that you might let somebody down on. And I just think it's a little bit personally, this is a very personal opinion, just it's a little more ethical not to tie it to these big numbers. I think how we report them out isn't necessarily true. It's just kind of more of a marketing tactic. So I will get off my high horse about that. You can let me know what your thoughts are. But these are things that you're sprinkling out at the end of the program. What are you going to acknowledge, if anything? So this is something important to think about. Now, we are going to talk about bigger ideas. When you're drafting and crafting your program, you can weave your theme into it. Now, your event may not have a theme like disco night, like, or anything like that, but it could. And if it does, you can weave fun words into it. Like, for example, we are doing an event right now. And the client came up with this. This is totally their thing, but it's kind of like a national park theme. And they called, instead of heads or tails, which many of you may be familiar with if you do fundraising events, it's like a little revenue enhancer game. They are calling it hats or trails because it's a national park theme event. And so you can literally weave little things like that in just in the wordings to kind of match the theme. But we've been a part of events that have way more vague themes, like we're all stars, or something like that. And so what they're doing with that theme is the idea behind the theme. They're trying to weave through all of the programming and the messaging. One of our clients did this super well, and this was all them. They were totally crafted their own program. But they had multiple words that they wanted to represent through the event and through their program. And each speaker kind of represented one of those words. And so you can weave a theme even about a word. And to kind of tie that into your entire flow, your entire program, create something that's really, really cohesive. And I love when organizations do this. To me, it's like a lot cooler and a little more memorable when people are getting up to speak and you're tying it all together versus just individual stories. That's more of a big idea because that's something that you work on throughout the whole process. Something else that's big is to make calls to action throughout the program. It's not just moments to give, it's moments to think, to reflect, to participate. and then to give. Like, you're calling on people kind of throughout the program, even if it's, some self-reflection, which requires some accountability on behalf of the attendee, right? Like, they're listening more when they are given to calls to action throughout the program. So hopefully you're sticking with me here, everybody. But now I want to kind of transition into some general programmatic ideas and things that we've seen in fundraising events. So one of those things is ethical storytelling. And I'm so glad to bring this up in this podcast. This is something that was on my list this year, particularly to research more. I want to learn more about it. And I have been, and I still am. So if you are a passionate person about ethical fundraising, please reach out to me. I'd love to hear it. But not only that, ethical storytelling specifically. So with ethical storytelling, I'm going to put a link in the show notes because there is a website all about it. But I want to share with you all kind of what it is and how you can weave this into your program. But basically, it's letting speakers kind of create their own script and representing their own story. So I'm going to share with you what it is, and I'm going to give you an example. So ethical storytelling does things like telling people's stories the way that we would want our story to be told. It's putting people first. It's explaining the purpose of the story, why it's being told. It's asking people if they want to be named or identified before already including them in the program, just not assuming, but asking. And it's upholding the dignity. And once again, I'm going to link this out because I'm taking this from a website, but they summarize it really well. But through empowering imagery and messages to motivate and inspire hope. It's truthfully representing a situation or story to educate the audience on the realities and the complexities and the nuances. So I really, really love this. It's a lot of like truth telling. It's asking for feedback. It's listening to constituents' voices. It's a lot of humility, a lot of learning. And it's being okay not telling a story if you can't do it in a way that holds, integrity throughout it. And so having people come and share their individual stories in a way that's comfortable for them is so impactful. And I've seen this recently in a really, really solid program. So they had a number of speakers, and each speaker was coming up and truly sharing a part of their life story that was applicable to the event. I was like emotional just being the planner, like in the back of the room. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is such a good program. And it's because people were getting up there and they wrote their own words. Now, the organization, helped them understand the point to like what they were trying, like what the theme was and how they can kind of weave that in. But the person told their own story. They came up with their own story. There were personal facts in there that nobody could have given them. Like, that came from themselves. And it was extremely powerful. So there's a lot of value in really abiding by ethical storytelling. And we can weave that throughout our event, and we should be weaving that throughout our events. So another concept is just to have shorter content. We talk about this a lot. And so this kind of goes for a lot of things. But something I kind of like to see, me personally, I have a short attention span. And so the more speakers, I don't mind it. I like the less time, more speaker kind of situation versus one person getting up there and giving like a 50-minute talk. I like 3 people giving 15-minute talks. Like, that is more interesting to me. And for like luncheons or breakfast, those are usually like really, really tight programs. We're talking like 50 minutes to an hour. In and out. I love a tight program. I love a short, tight program. I think that's amazing. So shorter content is just something that we're seeing since the pandemic because people kind of lost their attention span a little bit. And so we are seeing that kind of more in in-person events as well. Next, we have the idea of the use of videos. Videos are highly used in fundraising events. They are typically used to share somebody's story, to set up an ask, to educate about a need. And there are programs that have 1 video, that have 2 videos, 3 videos, 4 videos. There are sometimes a lot of videos. And I would say 4 feels like a lot, but I've seen 3 work pretty well, and they've been kind of scattered throughout the program. And something that's fun is when you have a video and it's about somebody's story, and then that person is in the room and they come up and they actually speak and add to it. And that's always kind of a little bit of excitement there. But videos are amazing because you can control, like, it is a crafted piece of art that you are editing and putting together, and you put music behind it, and these videos are made to evoke emotion, and that is what they do. Videos pull at people's heartstrings, and they accomplish that in a way that's controlled. It's a controlled environment. And so it does seem a little bit manipulative, but we are talking about fundraising events, people, and they just are a little bit manipulative. And there's many reasons why that is, but we are trying to convince people to give money in that moment. And a great way to do that is to pull at their heartstrings, which is easily done by a video that's pre-crafted and created. And so I'm not saying that this is the right way, but this is the way that the industry just kind of is. And so videos are very important. I would really consider if you're replacing a video for something else. You want to make sure that what the contents that is delivered in the room can match what the video can bring. And so I'm not saying do your whole thing in videos, obviously, but just decide if you're going to have a video or not. And if not, what are you going to do instead? So we want to pull at people's heartstrings. And some other things is that we want to bring the attendees together in a moment of reflection, which we kind of talked about earlier, actually. So I'll skip over that one. Let's shift to gala components. And I only want to spend a few minutes on here because I know not every event is a gala, obviously, but there are some components that I think might be helpful for you. So if you are involved in galas, here are some averages, if you will, that might be helpful. So if you do heads or tails and you're familiar with what that is, I mentioned it earlier, that usually takes about 10 minutes. You're getting people kind of moving around. So keep that in mind when you're doing your scripting. Now we're kind of shifting to the scripting part of the program. That takes about 10 minutes. Descriptions for each item does take about 30 seconds, or we want it to take about 30 seconds is what I should say. Because folks, you're announcing an action item and then there's a person who's reading the description, like the catalog reader, 30 seconds, like nothing more than that. It's too much. When you're doing an auction, each live item probably takes 3 to 5 minutes. It depends on the auctioneer. But that's typically how long from like introducing the item to selling it goes. Next, if you have a dessert dash, these are just, your typical program elements of a gala sometimes. That takes 7 to 8 minutes. Once again, that's people up and about moving around. So it takes a little bit longer as well. These are all really fun components, but when you're scripting, please script on actuals. Don't be an aspirational dessert dash or our dessert dash is only going to take 4 minutes. I doubt it. Dessert dashes on average are 7 to 8 minutes. And so please don't be aspirational in your run of show and your scripting because we want to make sure we are on time, not always behind. And so just consider the averages on how long these types of things take. So something else that you can note in your script is if an item can be sold twice or more, and if there is a minimum bid required, this item has to go for $500, no less. Those are types of things that need to be in the script. And then always say where people can pick up the things that they want. Where can they pick up their items? Do they pick it up that night? Do they pick it up from registration? What do they do? So always just you don't have to say it again and again, but at the very end of the program, make sure you mention. And if you want anything in the silent auction, the live auction, or the raffle, make sure you stop by the registration desk on your way out to pick it up. Push for something like that. Tell people where they can get their stuff. These are just some random tips and tricks. I have been going off the cuff a little bit here, but these are things that I've seen recently that have been kind of helpful to reflect on for myself. And so I hope it's helpful for you as well. So if I can leave you with anything, it is to please not neglect your program for your fundraising event. And one extra tip here is that your script with AVQs. So for example, if you've made a script and you're like, everything in green is an AVQ, slide 1, that type of thing. If you know what I'm talking about, your script with AVQs is not a run of show. It's a script with AVQs. I want to plug our run of show template right now. It's a production run of show template that an AV company will actually use to better produce your event. Yes, they'll use your script, but ideally they're using this 1-page run of show document with the whole flow and your script. So I just want to say that right now. We have to educate nonprofits on this all the time to a point where we just started providing the service of creating the production run of show based on their script. Happy to do it. It's super helpful to the AV company. So perhaps if you're listening to this and you don't put that into action, this could be a good thing to kind of amp up your program and eliminate room for error. Your AV partner is going to thank you for it. So in the show notes, you can check out, actually, you can email us. That's what you'll do. For a copy of our run of show template, you can email bettereventspod@gmail.com and we will send that to you. It's free, no strings attached. We just love to share it. Super helpful. So that brings us to the end of our episode for today. And because you're only hearing from me, thank you for sticking around. I have your bonus tip for today. Bonus tip is completely kind of off like random sometimes, and this has nothing to do with our topic today. But for the bonus tip, are you thinking about getting your CMP? CMP is a certification that you could get in the industry. This is something that I don't have. I'm not really interested in getting it right now, but I know some folks who are. So if you are thinking of getting your CMP, I invite you to talk to people who have it and figure out how they did it and get some tips and tricks from them. Because when you're doing a certification like this, it's often hard to get started. There's so many like things ahead that you can think about. So talk to somebody who has the CMP if you're at all considering it. And because our goal is to help, we want to support you all. So if that's something that you're looking for, please reach out to people on LinkedIn. I do want to call out one planner specifically, Shenandoah Nicholson from Beyond the BEO has her CMP. Beyond the BEO is another events podcast you can definitely check out. And I know that she's willing to talk about it. She may even have a podcast episode about it. So be sure to check that out as well. But if you're thinking of getting your CMP, reach out to the community. There are people who I'm sure are willing to share their experience. So that brings us to the end of our episode, everyone. Thank you so much for listening to another week. And you can find us and follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn at Better Events Pod. You can email us at bettereventspod@gmail.com. You can connect with us directly on LinkedIn. We love to see you there. And thank you so much for listening to another episode of the podcast. We will be back with you again next Wednesday.